Hello, welcome to another procurement conversation where we tackle the big issues facing procurement. I'm Rich Sains, and this week I'm joined by David Loseby, and this is the first of a fireside chat format procurement conversation. Unfortunately, Kirsty and Kavita aren't with us today. David's a procurement and supply chain management advisor and a researcher, and he also has a doctorate in behavioural science. Hi, David. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Rich. Good to meet you.
So our topic this week is the people side of procurement digital transformation. Before we begin, do post your questions and comments in the chat and let us know where you're connecting from today. So David, I think let's start off sort of first principles. How do you define procurement digital transformation?
I think for me, a procurement digital transformation really starts with sort of, I guess, taking common processes or processing activity and digitalizing it, so that in operationalizing what we can do in procurement, particularly where we want consistency and where we want to make sure that we get good governance, and we also get I'll call it the right attributes being pulled through into the procurement function, or any function for that matter, that we can do this in an efficient and expedient way. Digital transformation, particularly in a procurement context, is really there to make sure that we want to do things consistently. We want to make sure that there's good governance around what we're doing, and we want to make sure that obviously the outputs and the inputs that we produce then are of the best quality and standard that we can possibly deliver to the enterprise, and do that in an efficient way. And for me also, I think the side drop to that is to make sure then that is then truly freeing up people of their time in not doing things that frankly are I'll call it of an operational nature, and therefore gives them the quality time back to do the things that are more value adding. And I think that's how I would see digital transformations taking place. And I think one of the myths, and it may be in your question set, is that often people build wonderful business cases about how many fingers, toes, and arms and legs that they can save. But actually, the reality is that most of the research that I've seen is that it's not so much about necessarily releasing, headcount, but it's actually about making the function more valuable to the organization because of the things that you can then do. And obviously, there are many things that obviously have come onto procurement's, I'll call it, table to deal with over the last few years. So that's broadly how I would pitch it in terms of saying this is what digital transformation should be there to do.
I mean, do you feel that there's real transformation going on, or we're catching up with other departments out there that have sort of gone on that journey a bit sooner than we have?
I mean, clearly other areas of the business have gone sooner than us. I mean, certainly the finance transformations took place, before probably any other area or department of the business, and for very obvious reasons. I think I'll call it silently in other areas, there were sort of, I'll call it, operational transformations. But I think the reason why procurement is probably so more, I'll call it, in the headlines, is probably because if we think about it literally, procurement touches, and procurement supply chain touches, every single part of the business. And so therefore doing anything in that space is likely to cause ripples in other parts of the organization, and is likely to be felt more widely than perhaps anything else that takes place. I mean, if you think about the classic transformations that took place in the early 2000s and just prior to that, they were more of a finance nature. And whilst, people worried about people getting paid and that kind of stuff, and the books being able to be submitted at the end of the fiscal year and that sort of stuff, the ripple effect was actually quite low, because there were other processes that could run in parallel to pay people or do whatever was necessary. So actually the transformational piece wasn't as impactful as I think it is now, because it is far more wide reaching. And of course, the more that you add into a procurement digital transformation, particularly when you start to think, well, actually I need to consider, ESG factors, I need to consider cybersecurity, I need to consider, risk, etc. you are invariably building up the complexity and I guess the sort of the ongoing sort of requirements in a procurement space that probably was not even envisaged even 10 years ago. And so it's no wonder that actually it's a hot topic, and it's something that taxes many minds in terms of how we get this right, because it should do, because it's a very complex thing to achieve.
I mean, how do you feel that we should be better engaging people in transformation programs? Is that any sort of good tips or suggestions on how to do that?
I think the classic one for me is really, I've seen so many procurement digital transformations start and sort of focus on, I'll call it the technology part of this, and the IT and the infrastructure and et cetera. And it's almost like the people thing. And then guess what? Our supply chain and our suppliers within that supply chain become sort of almost, second, third order type considerations, when in fact we've got it the wrong way around. I could use a vernacular expression to describe that, but clearly I can't do that on live camera. But I'm sure people get the intent there. That what we're attempting here is effectively a change program. And at the end of the day, if you're changing something and people are involved, then you need to involve the people. It's not complicated. It really shouldn't be. And I think one of the things that I've seen so often get wrong is that people think, we put the system in, great, fantastic. But the fundamental for me is that doing a digital transformation it's hugely important that actually you get the adoption. And adoption is different to compliance. Compliance simply says, I've logged on, I've created my ID, and I've done the rudimentary sort of, I'll call it tasks in the system. But actually you've derived no value out of utilizing the digital system. And I think that this is the classic where then adoption is about then embracing the capability of a digital system and utilizing it to its full efficiency, really, and effectiveness. And I think that's when you get what I call the full fat version of digital transformation. I think the others then are just a watered down version of that. And I think that's where people then don't get the true value out of their investments. And that's a real shame.
What are the statistics around this? I've seen research saying, was it 78% or something that of digital transformations fail? I don't know if that's more generally rather than procurement specific. I don't know if you've got any data on procurement specific. I mean, sometimes they don't necessarily just fail, but they don't realise the sort of anticipated benefits, I guess.
There's probably three segments to this, which is those that sort of, I'll call it, framing it the positive way, which is those that deliver the required benefit and effectiveness and optimization, those that don't deliver the full benefits, and those that frankly either fail and or become disruptive. And in some cases I've heard, and I've been involved in, as in, after the, I'll call it, after the post-mortem, I'll call it, of companies whereby they ripped out digital systems, blamed the technology, and tried to implement another digital system and failed again, simply because they took exactly the same approach to it. So you've got this, failure to suboptimal to, yes, we've delivered the benefits and the value of the system. And I think broadly speaking, you'd say that, and it goes back to the early research of the likes of Cotter and others, really, where 70% of digital transformations fail to realize the full benefits. And I think the important thing is the understanding the fact it's full benefits, not complete failure. In other words, it will deliver some benefit, but it won't deliver all the benefit. I think it's probably fair to say that probably 30 to 40% of digital implementations you could probably argue are an outright failure. And on the flip side of that, you could say that 30 to 40% of digital transformations do deliver. They deliver what they're intended to do. But that's predominantly because the approach is different, and it's a lot more people-centric by research. So again, there's a lot of research on this, probably over the last, particularly more so over the last 15 to 20 years. But obviously, it's an area that I've researched quite extensively and will continue to do so, because I think the way in which this whole sort of digital transformation is tackled is hugely important, and it's hugely complex. And it's interesting when I talk to people and organizations who you would expect, how can I put it, would have a reasonably good grasp of the subject area. It's interesting how many say, so what's the formula then? What's the framework that we need to use? And I go, well, the reality is that each and every single one is different. And they go, well, that can't be right. So I said, so what you're saying to me is that the behaviors of every single person on this planet is exactly the same? I said, because those two things don't equate. And I said, what you have to realize is that as individuals and as organizations and geographies and all the rest of it, we have different cultures, behaviors, etc. And we need to recognize that in the way in which we design the approach. And that's why you can't say, if I delivered it this way last week in this organization, if I do exactly the same in another organization, in another sector, in another geography, I'll get exactly the same result. Well, guess what? You're going to be really disappointed, because it's not going to happen that way. And I think this is the harsh reality of it. And I think it's interesting when you can see people getting frustrated because they can't simply apply a formula to it. Yes, there is a methodology. Yes, there are, how can I put it, certain things that you can do in terms of defining things like how you frame the language that you use, how you use what we call behavioral nudges, choice architecture, how you sort of understand the motivations and drivers, not just of the organization, but also of the individuals. If you think about it in the context of what we've just gone through in terms of, the COVID-19 pandemic, if you then go through other stresses in terms of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, all of these things have different impacts in different organizations and at different times. And so therefore, again, understanding what that means for that community of people within that organization is hugely important, rather than thinking about, I'll call it the organization as an entity as a whole. You think about the community of people that are either utilizing, accessing, or benefiting from, what it is that you're doing in terms of digital transformation. So I think the one of the misconceptions is that I've seen so many people say, we'll just use the same communicate for everybody up and down the organization. And, that is just quite scary in my book, but maybe it's okay for some people. But the reality is that giving the same message to somebody who is, customer facing, customers coming in, day out, to somebody who's in we'll call it a back office function that never meets the customer, their worlds will be very different. Their daily lives will be very different. In the way in which they are as a personality, the personality traits that they have will be very, very different. And so therefore we need to make sure then that, what we present them with in terms of, language, motivators for wanting to adopt a digital system are hugely different. And if you think about, most people's perceptions are, they're going to do this digital transformation equals I'm out of a job. It's interesting how many organizations don't then take the time to say, whoa, wait a minute, let me talk to you about, this is the vision, this is the journey, this is where you fit into it, and this is where we can either upskill you, use different skills, liberate you to do something different or whatever. Those conversations are not being had early enough. Of course, the problem is that, it's like the classic, which is if somebody comes to you and says, we're changing the entrance into your driveway next week, Rich, is that okay? And you go, yeah, but what does that mean? You're changing the entrance to my driveway. Can I still park my car? You don't know. The same is true in digital transformation, which is if you come along and say, we're going to change the way the system works next week, is that okay with you? Is that all right? You're okay with that? And of course, people then quite naturally will go, so what does that mean for me? What are the implications for me as an individual? I don't understand. And of course, if you create that kind of psychological tension within an individual, the chances are that they will just check out, or at best, at worst, they will leave, and you may be hemorrhaging then talent out the door, which is the last thing we want to be doing in a situation where, we do need talented people and we do need people to understand what our business is. So it seems odd to me that we do all these things. And then I think in the supply chain context, telling your suppliers 2-3 months before you go live that, oh, by the way in which you get information flow from us, the way in which we want information from you about ESG criteria, and the way you get paid as well, we're going to change that in a couple of months, but we'll send you some instructions, don't worry, just log on. I think it's just asking for trouble. It's a bit like saying, it's almost a backhanded way of saying we don't value you. You maybe we only transact millions with you, but actually we don't value you because we've invested no time in you at all as part and parcel of what we do as a business. And most businesses, let's face it, will outsource 60 to 80% or more of their total turnover through their supply chain. So the fact that you don't engage with those people and understand, do they have the technical capability? Do they have the people skills to do this? Is just a complete mystery to me. Why you would leave that so late in the day to then engage with the supply chain? And it seems odd that then, because they're then up against the wall in terms of deadlines and going live, that they then get frustrated then with somebody then that can't simply, at the click of a finger, start to suddenly change the way they transact and do business. So, there's lots of things again here in terms of this, what we call relational contracting, which is above and beyond the sort of the formal contract that we have. We have relational contracts, we have social contracts. So we need to honor those too in the same way. And so I think this is where, for me, getting people to understand that we need to invest time in those things, and we need to listen, understand what people are saying to us. And sometimes people won't say exactly what they mean either. So we've got to be in the business also translating what somebody might be going, actually, I'm a supplier and I don't really want to tell these people that we just don't have the systems to be able to handle this. So they're probably nodding and going, yes, thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? I've no idea. And of course, particularly when it comes to, it may be very valuable SMEs, it may be somebody who is a, in value terms, quite a small provider, but actually might own, 50% share in the IP of a major product that you have or whatever else. And so, you have to understand that there are implications in this space.
So it sounds like there's more planning needed, more communication needed. And I think there's a bit of a skill set gap potentially. I mean, how do we get the right people into the profession to manage some of these programs? I think some of the research says they're not really being hired as a priority. Although digital transformation is a priority, the skills aren't being hired and the skills are lacking. So do you know what's driving that gap, and how do we bridge that gap?
I think if you think about it logically, I mean, many of us go through the traditional, or call it, professional route in terms of whether it's, SIPs, CILT, whatever it happens to be, and the reality is that the places that I'll call it that we fish for talent are really more around the technical, process, analytical, rational skills.
Yeah.
Which you could argue, okay, great, but in an era where we're moving into, we need more relationship type based skills, more soft skills, we need more digital skills. Are we actually bringing in the talent from the right pools to begin with? So actually bringing in people that have got, I'll call it, different but complementary skills. We're not. I think we're just continuing to hire more of the same. But actually, the reality is we do need different skills. It's not to say that we're going to throw all those skills away that we've got. What it's saying is that we have to get other skills to come along and be complementary to what we have. And so it may well be that there's a combination of upskilling. There may be some reskilling. There may be some completely new skills. But if you think about, the fact that, we're all taught taught category management 101 right from the very beginning, and, analytical skills and all the rest of it. If you flip that on its head and said, actually, I want to employ somebody who is a psychologist, but I'm going to give them the watered down version of all the things that we do in procurement, so they can understand our language, and we can then start to understand their language around saying, yeah, but you've got to be careful here about, so terms that I would use, like, in this situation, we've got high levels of cognitive load. We need to think about the cognitive framing around these communications. People then start to understand that actually we've got lots of things going on, which is cognitive load, and therefore it's going to be difficult to take on some new instruction. So let's be careful. To cognitive framing, which says, make sure you positively frame some of your messages if you want people to be incentivized and motivated to do things. So we can do that translation, but it's almost like we need people who are the bridge spanners that will translate between those two almost different I'll call it skill sets, and read them as being different languages. It's no different to going into a new country that's non-English speaking and expect just to talk very loudly in English and be understood. That's not going to happen. So we therefore have to learn the other language. And I think this is part of what we have to do if we're really truly going to embrace some of the digital skills and data science skills and soft skills, etc. Then we do need different people coming, but we also need those people that need to sit in the middle and be the bridge spanners between the different skill sets. And I think this is an intersection that we're at with procurement, whereby it is actually changing, I'll call it its identity, because it has to move with the business. It can't go, well, we're procurement and this is how we do it. It's a bit like saying no to the customer. You can only go and buy our products if you walk into the shop. People in this day and age are going to go, what? You're doing what? And so I think this whole we have to recognize that our skill sets have to change and support the business in what it needs to do. And that is true of many areas of the business, but procurement and supply chain are no exception. We have to take we have to take our medicine in that particular space, because we have to move and be a support function to the business. It's quite interesting when you look at Porter's original value chain model, whereby it talks about aggregating and collaborating all the support service of finance, procurement, legal, etc. We still have to do that. We're still part of that. We're not front end sales. But we need to give them the things that they need in order to be successful in selling. So I think that we have to move closer back to that model, really.
What soft skills do you think we need more of in procurement? I mean, you mentioned a couple there, but are there any others that you think we could do with?
I think one of the things that intrigues me is that gaining this understanding of even a simple thing around self-awareness about, so as me as an individual, what are my personality traits? What do I respond well to? So who am I as an individual, and how do I work best? How does somebody get the most out of me? So that self-awareness piece, even as a start, would be a really good starting point. And we have, all sorts of biases in terms of, we sometimes see ourselves better than we actually are. We sometimes, realize that, and we don't recognize that the people we're communicating with don't respond to the way in which we might communicate. So therefore we have to make adjustment in our communications. So I think there's all of those types of skills, which are really about our own awareness and awareness of the fact that other people act and respond differently and will respond positively or negatively to the way in which we then engage with them. And I think the one thing that is I find quite interesting is that this whole recognition that there is a bit of a paradigm shift, which is if you go back, a couple of decades to the very, hard-nosed negotiation, very, very adversarial, very, very go in hard, 2-foot of tackle type of approach, and very, very hostile. The recognition is that we almost need the flip side of that, which is we're very much more open, inclusive, collaborative, and that we develop more trusting relationships much sooner, and that the way in which we operate has to change, and therefore I'll call it those old behaviours of how can I put it, servant and master, dare I call it, between the buyer and the selling organisation, and those things. Those days are over, but I'm not sure that has completely filtered through. It's funny, I had a call with a sales director who was sort of saying to me, these buyers just don't get it. I'm getting the same old sort of, cricket bat approach sort of thing from these buying people. They just don't get it, that they're just not engaging with us in the right way. And I'm still seeing the behaviors I saw 20 years ago. Why is that? So I think the profession has to look itself in the mirror and say, we can no longer behave like that. It's not acceptable. The rest of the business is not really behaving in that way. And, the consumers ultimately that we serve and the general public don't expect that kind of behavior either. So it's a bit saying we have to take a long, hard look in the mirror at ourselves, really.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the silos have been breaking down within organisations, and organisations have become a lot more relationship centric, whereas procurement's sort of remained quite process centric. So yeah, I think there's definitely a benefit for us to be out there building relationships, being more open with the supply base, and given the shocks we've been through and the supply chain issues we've had, actually the organisations that have fared better have been the ones that have been more open with their suppliers and haven't just sort of hammered them for sort of cost savings when it's been difficult times. I think one of the frustrations I hear a lot is clearly the speed at which procurement can move and the time it takes to run through a procurement process. I mean, how do you think we can speed up that time to value in procurement?
That's a very salient point. I think one of the things that I certainly recognised, and I guess for me it was quite interesting because I was involved, fortunately, in the UK ventilator challenge. So this was build 5,000 ventilators in 12 weeks. Oh, and by the way, no supply chain exists today, no systems, no nothing. Just do it. And by the way, there's no lead time. Just get on and crack on and do it. So I think there are lots of lessons to be learned from that, which is sometimes actually, and I've heard it before from businesses as well, which is, procurement is the impediment to sort of, agility and flexibility. And we've all heard the tag, it's the procurement police. They've come along to sort of spoil our fun type of thing. So I think what we have to learn from that is that we have to deliver and develop more agile and flexible ways of doing business, both internally and externally. That message is loud and clear. To surround ourselves with an army of policies and procedures and go, wait a minute, no, you've not followed policy note number 43, subsection 2, subsection paragraph B, those days have gone. And I think, we have to be a lot more open to saying, if that's what you want to do and that's in the interest of the business, then let's try and work out how we can do that then. So it's a bit like saying, yeah, we know we've got all these things to sort of satisfy, but in the land of agility and flexibility, and particularly where we've got huge issues around, I'll call it supply chain certainty stroke resiliency, and we've got all sorts of other pressures around, quite rightly, around legislating aspects of what is happening in the supply chains. I think that this is why digital is quite an important factor to this, because the speed with which we can assimilate information, decisions, and not procrastinate over, what processes we need to be going through. I think the sooner that we can move to that more agile, adaptable, and flexible function, I think the better, because yes, we'll still have certain degrees of rigor and I'll call it quite right aspects of what I call due diligence to do, but I think we have to explain to our stakeholders, this is what we have to do, and we're doing this in order to protect you and the business. But let's find ways in which we can accelerate this, cut out the bureaucracy, and accelerate the whole process. And I think this is procurement, in a sense, sort of almost growing up and accepting that, yes, there is a rule book there for a good reason, but the rule book is almost to be interpreted rather than, I'll call it, fastidiously adhered to. And I think there's a difference in the way in which we then do that as a function. And that's not about sort of cutting corners and compromising. It's about being more effective, being more efficient, digitalizing, if you like, aspects that frankly need to be digitalized because they speed up the due diligence and decision-making processes for the right reasons. And I think this is where we've got to get over that sort of, how can I put it? Is digitalization I'll call it something that's bad for the profession? No, it's actually good for the profession if it's done in the right way. And I think that's about then choosing what aspects of what you're doing need to be digitalized and which aspects, frankly, and again, I guess this is a lesson learned out of the things we did on the ventilator challenge, and indeed the 3D printing of visors and protective visors for us and the NHS, etc. Is that sometimes you just go, that process is such a burden and all the rest of it, we're just going to do it this way, and it's an email or say conversation or whatever, and then this bit, the system can handle it. So I'm not in the camp of saying it's digital everything because that's the right flavor of the month. It's about being very clear about where it adds value, where it makes things efficient, and where it enables quicker and more, I'll call it, stable decision making to be made. In other words, we're not exposing the organization to any unknown or undocumented risks or anything else that might then give us a problem at a later stage.
I mean, what do you think is the most important thing that procurement's missing in terms of digitalization?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that a combination of factors, one of which is starting the digital journey means for most organizations, you put one element of, I'll call it, digitization into the business. Now, whether that's, requisition to order, whether it's, pulling through some ESG attributes, whether it's, e-auctions, whatever it happens to be. But the recognition is that I think you almost need to think about the architecture that you need for today and where you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck. But once you started on that journey, and obviously clearly I think you must, you then have to have a journey plan that says, yeah, but we're going to be continuously investing in this space year after year after year. Yeah. This is not the end. It's not the end. Even if I put in a all singing, all dancing, end-to-end sort of digital platform, guess what? The chances are that by the time you finish that program or that project, there'll be new innovations that have come along that will do even more. You've got to recognise that this will be an ongoing process. It's not an end process. It's a start process. And I do think the whole sort of thinking through, so what does this mean for my organisation, and how do I need to restructure my organisation to take account of the fact I'm doing things differently, and what future skills do I need, and how do I keep everybody on board whilst doing that, as well as future-proofing my skills pool and my talent going forward. Sorry, I thought I'd put this on silent. Sorry. So I think for me, it's super important that people look at this as a how can I put it, as a central piece of strategy to the procurement organization itself, not just purely about digital, because it interconnects with anything and everything else, in a sense, that's in that totality of what the procurement function does, and recognize it's going to change shape as well as we go through, as more things come through into the function, and maybe even release some things to an operational excellence type team that does transacting of X, Y, or Z. But also it's an opportunity to say, where do I then place specialities in my procurement function, assuming you have a larger team, because what I can't afford to do is to expect everybody to have that specialist skill. Now, whether that's about cybersecurity, sustainability, whatever it is, but these almost become subject matter partners in a sense that then operate in and around your different teams within the procurement function. And this is, again, another change to the way in which we operate, because we can't expect everybody to be everything from a cybersecurity expert to a data scientist to a sustainability guru, etc. It's just not possible. So therefore, we have to work out an architecture that says, how do I bring all those different skills into play, and accept that I'm going to have a number of and this is not a dumbing down word, but generalists that can operate the main core of what we do, but then have sufficient ability and skills to say, I need to bring this skill in from here and this skill in from there, and be almost, in a sense, the conductors of the orchestra that plays the if you like, the new tunes. And I think that's hugely important.
Given the amount of continual effort that will be required around digitization, is the transformation word a bit of an unhelpful word to an extent, where it feels like there's a 9 to 12 month program that you can go on, and then you've done it, it's done, or I don't know if there's another terminology that would be this whole continuous improvement, this sort of continuous review of the digital tools that you're using within procurement.
Probably, if I'm being honest, because the risk is that sometimes people think, digital, that's an IT project. So it becomes unhelpful in that aspect. So I do think we need to sort of think through. So, what is it that we're actually doing? And it is about improving the value proposition of the function. How we do that shouldn't really matter too much to the external audience. And therefore we should think about, so what is it that we're actually doing, even down to thinking about, what should my procurement excellence team look like, and what skills should they bring into anything and everything that we're doing. So I do think it's slightly unhelpful, because even the notion transformation suggests it's a limited duration project program, whatever you want to call it. But I think that there's almost the sort of the continuum, the sort of the ongoing element to what we do, because the harsh reality is that I can't see a period in the next foreseeable future whereby procurement departments become very static and very stable and just don't change. I think we're probably, and you could argue that that's an exciting thing to happen, because we're going to be in this exciting space of developing new ways of working, new thinking, new ways of doing stuff, new skills. We should see that as a real big sell, rather than, oh crikey, we're going to have to transform ourselves again type of thing. I think there is another way in which we need to think about describing that. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I wish I was that smart. But I think what we have to do then is to recognise that there is a how can I put it? There is a need to sort of repackage what we do and accept that, again, back to my sort of cognitive framing, which is, if you talk about something as a transformation, it's a bit like saying, well, actually, what you could read that as being what you're currently doing is not fit for purpose or good enough. The other bit is it's all going to be very turbulent for the next 12 to 18 months, because that's how long the program is. And there are consequences to that. So actually, the language, as you say, is probably quite unhelpful. So we do need to think about, so what is it that we want to describe we're doing, which is about, is it almost more about a controlled evolution of the procurement function, because we've got to think of things that are more, how can I put it, positive in the way in which they describe what is actually happening.
What I've seen in the marketplace is things don't actually take, but they don't need to take, depending on what you're doing. Obviously, it's P2P or whatever. It could be quite a lengthy program, but there's a lot of things you can be doing with regards to digital tools that you can try things. You try something for 2 weeks, a month, see how it goes. Adopt it if it works, and then get rid of it if it doesn't. There's that whole agility piece, which I think is sort of probably a bit misunderstood within procurement. Yeah,
no, absolutely, and I think the sort of the fail fast and move on type mentality is certainly very appropriate. And again, as well as I do, there are pieces of technology and out there that you can put in place and have up and running in a matter of weeks. Some will take you months, in fact, more than a year. So, I think we have to be very careful about what it is that we're trying to describe as well, and what it is that we're trying to deliver, because there are different flavors, just like ice cream. They're all different flavors, and they'll have different characteristics. And I think we need to recognize that they're not all the same.
Thanks for joining, David, and really appreciate the conversation. And this will be available on a podcast, and clearly people can replay on LinkedIn Live as well if they want to. But yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Okay, thanks, Rich. All the best.